Hello and welcome to World Insight with Tian. We're coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, President Xi Jinping has spoken to President Donald Trump about some negative factors that are clouding China-U.S. relations. Can the two leaders work out their differences before their upcoming meeting at the G20 Summit in Germany? And I spoke earlier to the prime ministers of both Sweden and Finland. Find out what areas China and these Nordic countries can cooperate. We start today's show with China-U.S. relations. Chinese President Xi Jinping is going to meet with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump during the upcoming G20 Summit in Germany. This will be the second face-to-face talk between the two leaders after they met in Florida 3 months ago. Issues still remain between China and the U.S., yet frequent high-level exchanges between the two leaders ensure at least bilateral communication.
A phone call ahead of a second meeting. Chinese President Xi Jinping didn't hide concerns over ties with the U.S. During the conversation, although Xi stressed that important results have been achieved in bilateral relations since the Mar-a-Lago meeting, he also mentioned China-U.S. relations have also been affected by some negative factors, and the Chinese side has already expressed its position to the U.S. Earlier Sunday, a U.S. missile destroyer trespassed China's territorial waters off the Shisha Islands. Foreign Ministry spokesperson said the move is a serious political and military provocation, and China dispatched military vessels and fighter planes to warn off the U.S. vessel.
China and ASEAN members have been working together to ease the situation in the South China Sea, while the U.S. is running in the opposite direction from countries in the region who aspire for stability, cooperation and development.
Last week, Trump administration has approved $1.42 billion worth of arms sales to Taiwan. The U.S. State Department insists although the U.S. sticks to the One China policy, the country has been doing defense sales with Taiwan for 50 years or so.
We firmly oppose the US selling arms to Taiwan, and we have already made our reservations known to the US on this issue. This action goes against the One China policy and the 3 joint communiques between China and the United States.
Over the phone call, Trump reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to the One China policy. The two leaders also expressed expectations for the upcoming G20 summit, vowing for the two nations to work closer together. The DPRK crisis and trade relations are also expected to be on their agenda.
And about that, our panelists weigh in on this relations between China and the United States. In our Beijing studio, we have Mr. Yang Xiyu, who's a senior research fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Sir, welcome to our program. Joining us from Washington, D.C. in the U.S., Robert Sutter, a professor of practice of international affairs at George Washington University. Welcome as well, Professor Sutter. I want to begin with you, Professor. You obviously are informed about the content of the bilateral phone calls between the two presidents. But it seems, Professor Sutter, there are different emphases that the two put on in terms of the nature of things to work out. Chinese president talk about the general bilateral relations. U.S. President Donald Trump keep on emphasizing on the DPRK issue. What do you make of this difference?
Well, I think it's important for people in China to understand that the perspective here in the United States is quite different than the perspective in China about these issues. Mr. Trump was elected in an election where criticism of China figured very large in the American discourse. There's a lot of complaining among the elites in the United States. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Asia Society, have all issued reports talking about a need for a toughening of the American relationship with China. Mr. Obama was seen as too weak and reticent in the minds of many critics. So Mr. Trump is coming from that context, and I think it's very important to understand this. Otherwise, you'll be baffled by why this is happening, because there's a sense of needing to rectify certain imbalances in the relationship that have been allowed to continue for a long time.
Mr. Yang, though, earlier we do remember very well that President Trump talked about this, quote, great chemistry between him and his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping. Have things going the other direction? Is it too early to say that?
Yes, it remains too early to say that. I should say by this way, through the first summit meeting in Florida, the two presidents was successful to stabilize the bilateral relation. With the background Professor Sutter mentioned, the background of the new phase of the bilateral relation was not good. And so many expectations of the bilateral relation was bad. But the two presidents make a turn around, say, have a stable relation. But now some unstable factors or negative factor emerged. That is inevitable because that is the long-time problems in the bilateral relation.
But let me ask you about that. I mean, President Xi, during the phone call, he was talking about earlier the meeting with President Trump achieved some, quote, important result.
Yep.
And now he talked about there are negative factors.
Yep.
How is China looking at the, quote, these negative factors? Does China believe that they are likely to intervene with the general trend that has been set, or rather set earlier during the bilateral meeting between the two presidents in the United States?
Well, I think the negative factors referring to several latest hot issues.
All right, name them.
Yeah. Arms sale to Taiwan, that's an old issue. And American destroyer invading Chinese water territory. Another issue, also not a new issue, and but one new issue is U.S. sanction on Chinese bank, very small local bank. That is something new. But basically, the negative factors are mixed with the new and the old issues. That reflects the complex of the bilateral relation, and I think President Xi will have a very difficult and a tough summit, unlike Florida summit with Donald Trump at the sideline 20.
Professor Sutter, what about that? We have to deal with them one by one, I guess. Hard to generalize. Let's just talk about the DPR. U.S. always believed there has to be more pressure coming from China toward Pyongyang. China say it is a sovereign country. We can't make decisions on their behalf. Meanwhile, now the recent sanction, as mentioned by Mr. Yang here in Beijing, against a Dandong bank, a small local bank in Dandong, accused by the United States of dealing with DPRK financially. All of this mixed up. Are the expectations to begin with very different, and therefore do we really have some common ground in terms of working onto the future about this issue, DPRK?
I think one thing I would ask you to consider is the change in the American approach to dealing with China in this government. The Obama government, like the Bush government, put a great deal of emphasis on the relationship with China. The overall relationship with China was very important for them. That isn't so important in this administration. What is important in this administration is achievements that are important for American interests, America first. And they don't put such an emphasis on the importance of the overall relationship. This is a big change. And people in China don't understand this, and Xi Jinping and his foreign minister act like it's continuing, the same high regard for the overall relationship, which caused Mr. Obama to be very reticent in his reactions to various affronts to China, from China. And Mr. Obama never linked one issue with another issue. Mr. Trump links all the time. He's constantly linking. This is a big change. And so the issues that we're facing now that have emerged after the Florida summit emerged because the Chinese did not meet expectations on North Korea. So now they're doing things in the United States on Taiwan, on South China Sea, on sanctions against North Korea, and there will be many others because these expectations were not met.
Okay, Mr. Yang, I need to have you to jump in here. First of all, expectations are set by the others, and it's hard to know what exactly the expectations are and why would the other party follow suit. That's one thing. I'd like to know about the Chinese view. Secondly, does China feel comfortable about linking all the issues together? And will China allow the United States or go with the United States about the fact that they want to link all the things together? Mr. Yang.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not fully agree with the method of analysis about linking and delinking between Obama administration and Trump administration.
So what is your view?
Basically, Trump opened a new method to deal with China, say, do business style of deals with China on individual issues. Yes, to some degree, it's linking, say, if you do something, do a favor for me on this issue, I will do a favor for you on the other. So that is the sort of linkage, not linking all of the issues get together to put either all of the good or all of the bad. So actually, it's a deal style.
But that is his style. So is China willing to go with it?
No, at least China, firstly, China doesn't go that way. China is strongly insist on principles. That's China's style. China always look up the importance of the principles on the individual issues.
All right.
For example, the Taiwan issue, we cannot make a deal for commercial style deal with U.S. on any other issues else.
On Taiwan, it's also an interesting case study between China and the United States when it comes to the relationship and the understanding of relations, selling of arms to Taiwan, despite of China's objections many times from the United States. For example, the biggest sales was in 2008 under Barack Obama to tune of $6.46 billion. That tapered down to $1.83 billion worth of weapons in the year 2015. And the Trump administration last week informed the U.S. Congress of a $1.4 billion deal as well. Of course, China objected to that. But what do you think, Professor Sutter, if Trump administration going to link the Taiwan issue, which is considered by China as the bottom line, to some of the other issues, does the Trump administration also understand the reactions and possible significance of this for the Chinese?
I think they do. I think we've already been through episodes of this in the past 6 months. Mr. Trump accepted a phone call from the Taiwan president and questioned the one China policy. Xi Jinping said he wouldn't talk to Mr. Trump if he didn't change his approach. Mr. Trump changed his approach. He had a summit with Mr. Xi Jinping. And yet we find that in the wake of the disappointment on the U.S. side with China's cooperation on North Korea, we find that the Taiwan issue and other issues has emerged again with the arms sales and the freedom of navigation issue and the sanctions against North Korea. And there's more in play. There are going to be economic issues, steel. You're going to see a toughening in the American position vis-a-vis China. The expectations weren't met, and so there's a lot of testing in this regard going on, including on Taiwan.
So, Mr. Yang, my question really, once again, related to earlier questions. Will China allow the bilateral relationship to go with the rhythm of the willingness of the Trump administration? Or China is likely to set the tune and set the pace of the bilateral relation? I think that is the ultimate question now seems to appear on the horizon. Mr. Yang.
Well, I don't think, first of all, I think that there's a big different way of thinking to deal with the bilateral relation between Washington, D.C. and Beijing. And secondly, both China and the U.S. want to dominate the pace and the focus of the whole bilateral relation. That make the bilateral relation development always in uncertain format. And thirdly, I think China always pay special attention to the different category of issues. The first category of importance, and thirdly, but Trump administration at least always selectively make focuses on the individual issues. So such a different way of thinking, different way of doing, always add extra troubles or difficulties to deal with already difficult issues, individual issues.
You know what, gentlemen, we only have 1 minute left. We know the two presidents are likely to meet during the G20 Summit in Berlin very soon, in Germany very soon. So I want to have both of you expectations. Will the two, when they meet, scrabble off some of the differences and still work on the common ground? What do you think, Professor Sutter? 20 seconds for you.
First, I agree with everything that Mr. Yang said in his last remarks, and secondly, I think it will go fine. The Americans are going to do this with a smile on their face.
Really? Okay, what about a smile on the face of the Chinese? Mr. Yang, will that be the case?
Well, the result will be a smiling face based on the 2 points. Number one, comprehensive consensus to stabilize the bilateral relation, no matter what the differences has emerged. And secondly, on the individual issue, the Korean Peninsula will have a new consensus that both of the countries will strengthen their cooperation and efforts on North Korean nuclear issue.
We'll see. Wow, that's a big statement over there. What, gentlemen? What's likely to happen at the G20. For now, I want to thank both of you for shedding some lights and certainly share your insights with us. Robert Sutter, Yang Xiyu, really appreciate it. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with Tian coming to you live from Beijing. Still to come on our program, I speak to the prime ministers of both Sweden and Finland at the sidelines of Davos Forum earlier. I find out how the humble origins of these two leaders have allowed them to remain with their constituents and the situation of the bilateral relations. The world is changing fast. The countries are looking for new options to connect and grow. That is why we have seen frequent visits to China by foreign leaders. At the recently concluded Summer Davos in Dalian, we caught up with two of them, prime ministers from Sweden and Finland, and got a rare chance to hear from the Nordic voices. First, let's meet Stefan Löfven, the Swedish Prime Minister. According to him, Sweden values the work and cooperation on climate change and clean energy with China. As the first Western country to establish diplomatic relations with the PRC, Sweden is also eagerly looking at other cooperation potential on security, trade, and global issues with China now. Take a look at this first.
Sweden is the 7th richest country in the world in terms of GDP per capita. It is an export-oriented and mixed economy. Sweden declined NATO membership in 1995 and remains non-aligned militarily, although it does participate in some joint military exercises with NATO and some other countries. The Scandinavian country is currently a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. It is also a member of the Nordic Council. In 2014, Stefan Löfven won the general election and became the Swedish Prime Minister. Prior to becoming Prime Minister, Löfven had worked as a welder before becoming an active trade unionist. He rose to become chairman of the trade union IF Metall from 2006 until being elected leader of the Social Democrats in 2012. The hard days of being a welder gave him a deeper appreciation for the conditions of grassroots people and made him a more pragmatic and down-to-earth person.
I heard you are going all the way in order to promote traveling in Sweden, even talking about your favorite outdoor activities, sandwich throwing. You're very good.
Yes.
Yearly how many times?
10, 12.
Wow, that's impressive.
That's a flat stone, and you throw it on the water, on the surface of the water, so like that. And the more time you bump, the better. So I am very good.
But I guess doing politics is not as throwing stone leisure as it was. There are a lot of things you have to handle right now, the economy and the welfare nation. Meanwhile, there is also the coalition government that you as the Prime Minister have to deal with every day. What is it like?
You have to be able to negotiate. You have to be focused on the long-term objectives, but at the same time be prepared also to take into consideration other parties' views.
You started as a trade unionist.
That's true.
So jobs actually extremely important for your previous job. And now, as you have to incorporate that thought with many of the other needs you have to balance as the prime minister of your economy and your society. So how is that going to balance? We see some of the countries' leaders making very different choices as a result of that.
Now, I keep focus on job and employment. That's number one. But when I talk climate issue, I can also see the job perspective. When we're talking about the welfare, the health care sector, I can also see the job perspective. So all the ministers in my government, they have to also explain what they're doing, what they want to do, right. How does it contribute to decreasing unemployment and increasing employment. I mean, you have to admit, globalization is already here. We have a global economy. You look at the enterprises working all over the globe. Capital is the same, working all over the globe. We have new business models now, and huge enterprises producing in several countries.
So it's a reality.
It is a reality, so let's face that. I mean, you cannot resist that, but we need to be much more clear about this globalization needs to work for everybody. Today we have a situation in the world where perhaps 10 people own as much as 3.5 billion people. And that says something. So the distribution is wrong. So that's what we need to address now, and that is why I launched something called a global deal, meaning that we need now on the global level a social dialogue between employers, employees, but also politicians, the society, the academia, the civil society, on how to make sure that this global economy works for everybody.
But that's only part of your job. The other part is how to do and what to work with the EU, particularly when the EU is facing a temporary challenge of Brexit and its future goals together. What do you think are the biggest potential to be developed between the Nordic countries like you, Sweden, and the EU? Are you really enjoying yourselves while being part of the EU, or mainly contribute to this bloc?
Now, first, the Brexit is of course a failure. Saying something else would be wrong. It is, but directly after the Brexit referendum, we sat down in Bratislava, all the EU 27, and discussed what to do now. And we decided this is not the time to discuss new treaties. This is the time to focus and deliver on what people actually expect from this. So we're focusing now more on employment, not least youth unemployment, because we need to reduce that dramatically, because it's a ticking bomb. Security, being both defense and countering terrorism, and also the social aspects, and not least, of course, making sure that we implement the Paris Agreement. So if we just focus and showing people that this is an organization in which there is a clear added value, not least for Sweden. So yes, we do enjoy it. We do see that it is profitable. We gain from this. You know, our export equals to 50% of our GDP. So that says everything.
Yeah. Talking about the Paris Agreement, is the future of the EU pretty much hung on how you are working together about it, and also you are communicating with and working with others outside the EU on that specific one?
Yeah, the Paris Agreement is very important to us as a country, but to EU as well. So last week we had the European Council again in Brussels, and we all stated that this is very important. We need to implement, and EU, we want to be in the very forefront to make sure the Paris Agreement is implemented, because if we do not do that, we know what will happen to our planet, and we cannot take that responsibility.
That's tremendous business opportunities as well.
Indeed, indeed. So that's what's good now, that we have passed a situation, a time where climate issues and working for the environment were regarded as obstacles. They're not. These are opportunities. This is a new technology, the new jobs, and first and foremost, a good environment for our grandchildren as well.
Will that influence your relationship with the United States?
No, basically we have a good relation with the United States. We disagree on this with the administration, of course, and we're sorry that they're pulling out of the Paris Agreement. I think it's a mistake. I'm convinced it is a mistake for the climate issue in itself, but also for the United States. And I believe that is why I believe we have some 12, 13 states now claiming that they will implement the Paris Agreement.
But without national government participation, it's going to be a very different thing.
It'll be different, yes, but still, look at California, a huge state in the United States. They are saying, no, we're going through with this. And I'm convinced that, the rest also will see this is where the future is.
Sweden now is hosting the rotating presidency of the Nordic Council.
Mm-hmm.
China and Sweden can work a lot about that. You said that also during the discussion with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. But the question is how?
It is, and we need to see both these perspectives. When we cooperate in the Arctic Council, for example, what do we see? We see, for example, the climate issue very clear. Because if we do not handle this in a good way, we see the ice melting, and that is something that we need to address. And by doing so, we also understand we need to cooperate on other issues. How do we develop new technology, for example? And that could be both multilateral cooperation, but also bilateral cooperation. Mm. So I guess basically we look at the same issues, but from different perspectives, depending on what fora we're talking in. Mm. But it concerns the most important things all the time, the issues. And today it is definitely climate and making sure globalization works for everybody.
Mr. Prime Minister, Sweden is one of the very first Western countries to have diplomatic relations with China. The first. All right, there we go. Time changes. Priorities also change. We experienced the Cold War, and now we are in a very different stage. Globalization, new technology. What are some of the options that the two countries could have when it comes to further develop this bilateral relationship?
One being, excuse me if I mention that again, one being the climate issue, because that is number one, to make sure that we can handle this, showing our children and grandchildren once again that they can live in a safe world as well. Another issue is common security. I mean, how do we avoid war? How do we decrease tensions in regions all over the world? And that is, I think, a very strong expression, common security. How do we build common security? We as a country right now, we are increasing our military capacity because it is needed. When we look in our neighborhood, what's happening, we need to do that. That's important. But the long term, how do we build bridges? How do we develop dialogue so that we decrease tensions? And that, I think, is, I mean, right now we serve for 2 years in the Security Council, also together with China. We have a good dialogue. Mm. So I think that's even also a very important. Climate, huge issue. Security, another huge issue. On the global perspective, we need to address that together.
On the security issue, do you have already some specific thoughts about how to develop?
First, we believe that the UN Security Council can be more efficient, more transparent, address more of things before a crisis actually happens. How do we can prevent crisis? How can we work to prevent that with diplomacy, but also with making sure that people, for example, don't have to flee. How do we decrease the number of refugees, meaning that they can actually stay and live a decent life in their own country? Those and the environment again, because those things create tensions, and that is what we need to work on how to prevent those tensions.
And Sweden, with also your leadership, very active in geopolitics and international relations. You met with the great leader in Iran. You also have been subscribing to the two-state solution, the very first among the European countries, I have to say, about that between the Israelis and Palestinians. What are you thinking when it comes to the future role of Sweden
It is important to do your share, so to speak. We're a small country, yes, but we've always been very active in international politics, and we think it's our obligation to contribute, to do our part. And being a non-aligned country also means that I think that also builds trust, because we do not necessarily serve any other interest, but we're in this because we want to do something good, both with the environment or the security issues or other issues. So we need to be clear on our views, but also respect, of course, others, and as I said, develop a dialogue, a constant dialogue, so we can talk to countries with on difficult issues, express what we see is important, and at the same time also keep the good relationship, the good dialogue, because that is the long-term thinking. You need to have a dialogue in order to achieve something.
Visions and actions.
That's right.
Mr. Prime Minister, what a pleasure to have you on CGTN.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For being
Thank
with
you.
us.
Thank you.
That's Stefan Löfven, the Swedish Prime Minister, in an exclusive interview with us at the concluded Summer Davos. Like his Swedish counterpart, Juha Sipilä, the Finnish Prime Minister, also has engaged in new development for bilateral relations with China. With some frequent visits from both sides, Finland has got very clear goals in this relationship: business on green technology, winter sports cooperation, and potential opportunities related to the Belt and Road Initiative. The Finnish Prime Minister has a down-to-earth style, both thinking and describing the real essence of relations with China. But our conversation begins with his role as a national leader in the dramatically changing political and economic landscape. Must be fun in the process.
Well, it has been fun time to time.
And I know exactly what you meant.
Yes. It was a challenging situation when we started 2 years ago. We are doing three things at the same time. We are doing big reforms, which are targeting to the 2030 years, and after that, one of the biggest is social and healthcare reform. Then we made some budget cuts also, which to education also, but only a small part of the budget.
You faced opposition.
Yes, there was a huge debate in Finland because of that, but now we have done it, and actually we increased a little bit our education budget. And besides that...
So you surrender? Does that mean you surrendered?
The situation has changed a lot. We are growing again. Our growth at the beginning of the year was almost 3%. So there is a little bit more room in public economics also, and we are doing a lot to change our labor market and the basis of the business, so that now our business is growing and also employment is growing.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, I know your country, Finland, together with many Nordic countries, are looking for options when it comes to economic development and cooperation worldwide.
Yeah.
That includes China. That's why you're here.
Yes.
You met with the Chinese President, Mr. Xi Jinping. What are some of the areas that you think that the two sides really have a potential to work on together?
Yeah. I would name two areas. First of all, this climate change. This is a challenge for all of us, and we can do a lot by technology. Clean technology, renewable energy, and so on.
Having a prime minister developing wood gas in the backyard of his house will not hurt, right? So tell me about your personal anecdote about that technology.
At the personal level, I decided that my family will be carbon neutral. And a part of that project, I made a wood gas car, and my heating and electricity was based on wood gas.
Wait a minute. Everything sounds so easy when you just say, I just made a wood gas car and we just developed the technology. But I'm sure at the very beginning it was not like that. You have to think about ways in order to achieve it.
Well, I'm an engineer, so it's only a challenge, and it took about 1 year to build the wood gas car and heating to my house. But it was fun. It was hobby.
Were there questions from the family?
Well, some. There were some questions, but they were happy to be in the car also. I think that everyone can do a part of that, and we have a special program for every Finns in Finland that you can even sign an agreement that you will reduce your personal carbon dioxide at a personal level, and quite many companies has also signed the agreement. So this is one way in Finland to develop this area. And we have a target as a country to be a carbon neutral in 2045.
Right.
It's a very challenging target, but I'm sure we will solve the problems which are ahead of us.
Of course, to the carbon-free world is terrific, but at the same time, you also realize, Mr. Prime Minister, the competition for clean energy when it comes to business opportunities, the competition for technology related to climate change, also very competitive all over the world. So how can you, in a way, come out and make sure others look at Finland and think about you as the country to go to about those technologies, about those business opportunities?
I see it very positively, the future in Finland in that respect. I remember the time when there was a resistance against all the changes and all the targets we set as a government. But nowadays there is a competition which is very good for technology development, and I'm sure that Finland will survive in this game also.
And how will be this vision eventually, do you think, Mr. Prime Minister, and some of the other ideas going on in the region, transform our economies, transform even the future concepts of the international community and probably international governance?
Yeah, I think that the free trade is number one, that we don't build any walls between the countries concerning trades. And there has been some concerns about this after the president change in the States. And but I think that we should see this as a challenge together to increase trade between European Union and China at the same time when there will be some limitations to other trade. And of course these connections are very important also in trades, data connections and physical connections.
And you know, our President Xi Jinping, is also a sports fan.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sure a lot of sports conversation took place.
Yeah, we discussed a lot about winter sports. You will have a winter Olympic Games in 2022. Congratulations about that.
Thank you. We work hard for that.
Yes, and I know that you have challenging targets for the sportsmen also for the Olympics, and I think that we can cooperate in technology side to build the stadiums and ice hockey rinks and so on, and also we can help to train in skiing, in ice hockey and so on, but also to increase the popularity of the winter sports during the people.
What is your favorite?
My favorite is skiing and ice hockey.
Ice hockey?
Ice hockey, yeah.
Which position you play?
It
varied.
It varied. Well, nowadays it's more seeing and watching, but skiing I am still active also personally.
Another thing people look at Mr. Prime Minister, is the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
As you may know, it is an initiative, an idea, which China circled around, and many partners join in.
Yes.
They enlarge the idea, they enrich the idea as well. What about from Finland? Is there a role that Finland can play in the future of this? Is there some benefits Finland can also enjoy?
Yeah, there is a role. We actually discussed about the railway connection through Finland, through Russian to China. We discussed also a data cable connection through the Arctic Sea through Finland to Europe and China. This is one target, and also air traffic is very important between China and Finland. It's Finland and Helsinki has been a kind of hub between Europe and Asia.
That's Juha Sipilä, the Prime Minister of Finland, talking to us exclusively at the Summer Davos. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight with Tian with CGTN in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and see the Weibo as well. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for insights across China and around the world. Good night.